The soulmate you love spoke about you to someone. Hear what was said. Something shifted in a conversation that was never meant to reach your ears. It happened in the quiet space between two people who believed no one else would ever know what was said. There was no dramatic announcement. No grand confession. Just a pause, a deep breath, and then your soulmate spoke your name with a sincerity that surprised even them. Why did that moment matter so much? And why did the person listening suddenly stop smiling and lean in closer? Stay with this, because one small sentence opened a door that neither of them expected to walk through. The next few moments revealed emotions that had been hidden for far too long, and what followed would quietly reshape everything they believed about you. The room felt ordinary, yet something about the atmosphere had changed. The conversation had started with everyday topics before drifting somewhere neither of them planned to go. Then your name appeared almost unexpectedly, and everything slowed down. Your soulmate looked away for a second, searching for the right words, almost as if they feared saying too much. The listener noticed the hesitation immediately and gently asked, "What makes this person so different?" That simple question lingered in the silence. Instead of answering quickly, your soulmate smiled in a way that couldn't be rehearsed. It wasn't the smile people wear to impress someone. It was quieter. Real. The kind that appears when a memory arrives without permission. They admitted that every attempt to forget you somehow led them back to another reason to remember you. Before you move on, there's one detail you haven't discovered yet. The conversation was only beginning, and the next answer revealed something even deeper than admiration. Without realizing how much they were revealing, your soulmate began describing the little things no one else seemed to notice. They talked about your resilience during difficult moments, the kindness hidden beneath your quiet decisions, and the rare way you made ordinary days feel meaningful without even trying. The listener became unusually silent, almost studying every word instead of interrupting. Then came a question that changed the entire direction of the conversation. If you feel all of this, why haven't you told them? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Their eyes drifted toward the window as though they could already see a future they were afraid to touch. A gentle laugh escaped, followed by a whisper filled with hope and uncertainty. Some feelings become so important that you're terrified of saying them too soon. That single sentence lingered in the air long after the words ended. But something else happened immediately afterward, something unexpected that neither of them saw coming. And that next moment may explain why your story is far from over. A quiet realization settled over the conversation just as it seemed there was nothing more to say. The person sitting across from your soulmate didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, they watched carefully, sensing there was another truth waiting beneath the surface. Then, with genuine curiosity, they asked, "Do you think they have any idea how deeply they have affected your life?" Your soulmate lowered their eyes for a moment before slowly shaking their head. "I don't think so," they admitted softly. "They probably believe they're just living their life like everyone else. But they have no idea how many of my decisions have quietly been influenced by them." Those words carried a weight that couldn't be hidden. The listener leaned back, almost amazed that someone could hold so much affection without demanding attention in return. Stay a little longer, because what your soulmate revealed next wasn't about romance alone, it was about the quiet impact you left on their heart without ever trying. They described moments when your smile unexpectedly returned to their thoughts during stressful days, how hearing your name could instantly brighten an ordinary afternoon, and how even brief conversations stayed with them long after they had ended. Every memory they shared seemed to answer a question the listener hadn't even asked yet, proving that your presence had become part of their everyday world in ways that were impossible to ignore. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. The listener gently smiled and said, "You don't speak about them the way people usually talk about someone they like. You speak as though you've already found someone you never want to lose." Those words caught your soulmate completely off guard. For a second, they couldn't respond. They simply laughed quietly, almost embarrassed that their emotions had become so obvious. Then they confessed something they had never spoken aloud before. "Whenever I picture my happiest future," they said, "they're somehow always there. I never planned that. It just keeps happening." The room became still again, but this silence felt warmer than before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding. If this moment is touching your heart, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments and, if you're enjoying the journey, subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. There's another piece of this conversation that changes everything. The listener looked directly into your soulmate's eyes and asked one final question: if they stood in front of you right now, what would you tell them? That question lingered like the final note of a beautiful song, waiting for an answer that would reveal emotions too powerful to hide. Your soulmate took a slow breath before answering. There was no rehearsed speech. No perfect sentence. Just honesty. "I'd tell them they changed me," they whispered. "Not because they tried to, but because knowing them made me want to become someone better." The listener's expression softened instantly. They could see this wasn't admiration built on fantasy. It was respect, gratitude, and genuine affection woven together through countless quiet moments. Your soulmate continued, explaining that you had unknowingly inspired courage during uncertain times, patience during difficult seasons, and hope during days that once felt ordinary. Then, almost unexpectedly, they smiled with quiet confidence. "Maybe one day," they said, "they'll hear what I've never been brave enough to say." The listener nodded as if they already believed that day was closer than either of them imagined. But before the conversation came to an end, one final unexpected message was shared, a message so personal and so revealing that it would leave the listener completely speechless, and that unseen moment is where the story takes its most unforgettable turn. No one expected the conversation to continue after that, but just as both of them began gathering their thoughts, your soulmate quietly said, "There's one more thing I've never admitted to anyone." Those words instantly changed the atmosphere again. The listener slowly sat back down, sensing that whatever came next had been carried in silence for a very long time. Your soulmate looked toward the floor for a brief moment before speaking with complete honesty. "Sometimes I replay our conversations in my mind," they confessed. "Not because I can't move on, but because every time I remember them, I discover something new that made me admire them even more." The listener was genuinely surprised. They had expected another compliment, but not this level of reflection. Then your soulmate described how certain words you once spoke had quietly encouraged them during difficult decisions, even though you never knew it. "It's strange," they smiled. "They probably forgot those moments, but I never did." Stay with this, because the next part of their confession uncovered something that had been growing silently beneath every memory. It wasn't built on fantasy. It was built on countless small moments that slowly became impossible to ignore. The listener finally asked the question that had been waiting since the beginning of the conversation. "What are you afraid of?" The room became completely still. Your soulmate didn't answer right away. Instead, they let out a quiet breath and smiled with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "I'm afraid," they admitted, "that one day they'll believe they were never important to me." Those words carried more emotion than anything spoken before. They explained that life had often pulled them in different directions, creating distance that looked like indifference from the outside. But inside, the feelings had never disappeared. In fact, they had quietly grown stronger with every passing season. The listener nodded slowly, beginning to understand why your name had been spoken with such care from the very beginning. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to share where you're watching from, and subscribe if you'd like to hear how this remarkable journey unfolds. Because what happened next wasn't another confession, it was a decision. Your soulmate realized that silence could no longer protect feelings that deserved to be expressed. With renewed confidence, your soulmate leaned forward and spoke words that even surprised them. "The next time life gives me the chance, I won't let fear decide for me." There was no dramatic promise, only quiet determination that felt far more powerful. The listener smiled warmly and replied, "Then don't wait for the perfect moment." Sometimes the most meaningful conversations begin with one honest sentence. Those words settled deeply in your soulmate's heart. They realized they had spent too much time wondering what might happen instead of appreciating what could happen. As the conversation finally came to an end, they stood up carrying something they hadn't brought into the room, a sense of peace mixed with quiet excitement. Yet before walking away, the listener called them back with one final observation that stopped them in their tracks. "You know," they said softly, "I have a feeling this story isn't waiting for someday anymore." Your soulmate turned around with a curious smile, unaware that the very next sign they were about to receive would make those words feel less like a prediction, and much more like the beginning of something neither of you could have imagined. The very next day unfolded in a way that felt almost impossible to predict. Your soulmate wasn't searching for a dramatic sign, yet one arrived in the most ordinary moment. While walking through a familiar place, they overheard someone mention a topic that instantly reminded them of you. It wasn't your name this time, it was a story, a dream, a small detail that echoed something only the two of you would understand. They stopped for a moment, smiled to themselves, and quietly whispered, "This can't just be a coincidence." That single moment brought back every word from the conversation they had shared the day before. Suddenly, the doubts that had been holding them back didn't seem nearly as convincing. Instead of wondering whether they should speak, they found themselves wondering why they had waited so long. Before this story reaches its final chapter, there's one remarkable turn you won't want to miss. Because what happened later that afternoon made your soulmate realize that some connections don't disappear, they simply wait for the right moment to be understood. As evening approached, your soulmate found a quiet place to think. The world around them continued moving as usual, but inside, everything felt different. They replayed every meaningful memory, every laugh, every unexpected conversation, and every silent moment that had slowly built something far deeper than they had ever admitted. Then they opened a blank message, stared at the screen, and began typing words they had never been brave enough to write before. They paused, erased them, started again, then smiled. For the first time, they weren't trying to sound perfect. They only wanted to sound honest. If this journey has made you reflect on someone special in your own life, consider sharing this story with someone who might need it. Leave a comment with the moment that touched you most, and subscribe if you'd like to experience more heartfelt stories like this. Because the message they were writing wasn't about changing the past. It was about opening the door to a future that had quietly been waiting all along. Before pressing send, your soulmate looked out at the fading sky and realized something that changed everything. Love wasn't about flawless timing or perfect words. It was about having the courage to let someone know how deeply they had been appreciated all along. They smiled with a calm confidence that hadn't been there before and softly said, "No matter what happens next, they'll finally know the truth." In that instant, fear gave way to hope, uncertainty became quiet excitement, and the silence that had lasted so long finally came to an end. The story that began with a hidden conversation had led to something much greater, a heart ready to speak honestly without expecting anything in return. And somewhere beyond that single unsent message, a brand new chapter was waiting to begin, proving that sometimes the most meaningful words are not the ones spoken first, but the ones spoken when you're finally ready to mean every single one of them. Morning arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. Your soulmate no longer felt trapped between uncertainty and hesitation. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. They reopened the message one final time, reading every word carefully, not to make it sound more impressive, but to make sure it sounded genuine. Then something unusual happened. Before they could press send, someone they deeply trusted reached out and casually asked, "Have you finally decided to tell them?" Your soulmate smiled without answering immediately. After a thoughtful pause, they quietly replied, "Yes, because hiding the truth has become harder than speaking it." The person beside them nodded with complete understanding and gently said, "Then don't let another day convince you to stay silent." Those simple words carried incredible weight. They didn't feel like advice. They felt like permission. Stay with this, because the next few moments revealed that the conversation about you had already traveled farther than your soulmate ever expected. Another person had begun noticing the change in them, and their observation uncovered something even more remarkable. As the day continued, your soulmate found themselves sharing more about you than they ever had before. They weren't talking about grand moments or unforgettable events. Instead, they described the little details that quietly stayed in their heart, the way you encouraged others without expecting recognition, the calm you brought into difficult situations, the unexpected humor that appeared when nobody was expecting it, and the quiet strength you carried through life's challenges. The listener smiled warmly and finally interrupted with a sentence that stopped your soulmate completely. "You know," they said, "people don't remember details like that unless someone has truly changed their life." Those words echoed in the silence. Your soulmate looked down for a moment, realizing they had never actually measured how much you meant to them until someone else pointed it out. Every memory suddenly felt brighter. Every conversation seemed more valuable than before. There was one final piece of this story still waiting to be revealed, and it wasn't another memory. It was a decision that could shape everything that followed. Before the evening came to an end, your soulmate made themselves a quiet promise. They would stop waiting for the perfect circumstance and start trusting honest moments instead. They realized that meaningful connections aren't built through dramatic speeches but through sincere words spoken at the right time. As they slipped their phone into their pocket, they looked toward the horizon with a hopeful smile and whispered, "When the moment arrives, I won't let fear speak louder than my heart." They didn't know exactly when that opportunity would appear, but for the first time, they believed it was closer than ever. And just as they turned to leave, a completely unexpected notification appeared on their screen, one they never imagined they would see that day. It wasn't random. It wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of message that makes someone stop walking, read it twice, and quietly wonder if life has been preparing this moment all along. That single notification would become the beginning of a conversation neither of you would ever forget. The notification didn't contain a long message. It didn't need to. A few simple words were enough to make your soulmate pause completely. They stared at the screen, read it once, then again, almost unable to believe how perfectly it arrived after everything they had shared the day before. Their heart wasn't racing because of excitement alone, it was because they finally understood that life has a remarkable way of creating opportunities when someone is ready to receive them. They smiled, slipped the phone back into their hand, and whispered, "Maybe this is the moment I've been preparing for," without even realizing it. Every doubt that had once seemed overwhelming suddenly felt smaller. The conversation about you had changed something deep inside them, and now the world around them seemed to be quietly responding. But don't leave yet, because the next choice they made revealed more about their heart than every conversation that came before. Sometimes one small decision carries more meaning than 100 unspoken feelings. Instead of rushing forward, your soulmate chose something unexpected. They took a slow walk through a place filled with familiar memories, allowing themselves to think clearly before taking the next step. Every corner reminded them of lessons they had learned, moments they wished they had appreciated more, and dreams they still hoped could become reality. Then they quietly admitted something they had never fully accepted before. "I've spent so much time wondering whether they would understand me," they said softly, "that I forgot to believe they might already understand more than I imagined." That realization lifted a weight they had carried for far too long. For the first time, they stopped rehearsing perfect conversations and started trusting honest ones. They knew there were no guarantees, yet they also knew that meaningful stories are written by people willing to take one sincere step forward. As the sun slowly began to set, they opened the message once more, made one final adjustment, and smiled with complete peace. There was nothing left to hide. Only truth remained, waiting to be shared. As night quietly settled in, your soulmate looked toward the sky and felt grateful, not because every answer had arrived, but because fear no longer controlled the future. They realized the conversation that began with someone asking about you had become the turning point they never expected. It had shown them that the feelings they carried weren't temporary emotions, they were built through respect, admiration, and countless unforgettable moments that refused to fade. With steady hands and a hopeful heart, they finally pressed send. There was no dramatic celebration, only a quiet smile that reflected genuine relief. In that single moment, silence gave way to possibility, uncertainty transformed into courage, and the next chapter finally began. Yet the story wasn't ending there. Somewhere, On the other side of that message, another heart was about to read words that had been waiting far longer than either of you realized, and the response that followed would become the most unforgettable moment of this entire journey.